Nike, the shoe company that sold a dream. Imagine starting a company with almost no money, selling shoes from the trunk of your car, and competing against established giants that already dominate the market. Now imagine turning that tiny operation into one of the most recognizable brands on earth, a company whose logo can be recognized without even seeing its name. A company that doesn't just sell shoes, but sells confidence, ambition, and the idea that anyone can push beyond their limits. That company is Nike. But Nike's story didn't begin with billion-dollar athletes. It didn't begin with massive stores. And it certainly didn't begin with the famous swoosh. It began with one man's strange idea: that running shoes made in Japan could challenge the biggest shoe companies in America. This is the story of how Phil Knight turned a risky idea into Nike, and how Nike became one of the most powerful brands in the world. This is Mr. Finspire, where business becomes a story. In the early 1960s, Phil Knight was a young man who loved running. He had also developed an interest in business. While studying at Stanford, Knight wrote a paper imagining a different future for athletic shoes. His idea was simple. Instead of American companies manufacturing expensive running shoes, why not import high-quality shoes from Japan and sell them in America? At the time, Japanese manufacturing was becoming increasingly competitive. Knight believed Japanese companies could produce good shoes at lower costs. It sounded like a reasonable idea on paper. But turning that idea into a business was another story. After finishing his studies, Knight traveled to Japan. There, he approached a Japanese shoe manufacturer called Onitsuka Tiger. He introduced himself as an American distributor interested in selling their running shoes in the United States. Knight didn't have a huge company behind him. He didn't have a massive warehouse. He was essentially trying to convince a major manufacturer to trust a young entrepreneur with an unproven business. Eventually, the deal happened. Knight received samples of the shoes, and he sent them to his former running coach at the University of Oregon, Bill Bowerman. Bowerman was more than a coach. He was obsessed with improving athletic performance. He believed running shoes could be better, lighter, more comfortable, more effective. When he saw the Japanese shoes, he became interested, and eventually, Bowerman became Knight's business partner. Together, they created a company originally called Blue Ribbon Sports. Their business was incredibly simple: buy shoes, sell shoes, reinvest the money, and sell more shoes. But there was one problem: they didn't have a huge retail store. So Knight began selling shoes wherever he could, at track meets, from his car, and directly to athletes. Think about that. One of the future world's biggest athletic brands started with shoes sitting in the trunk of a car. There was no giant advertising campaign, no celebrity endorsement, no expensive headquarters, just a salesman, a coach, and a belief that better athletic shoes could change performance. But Knight soon realized something. Selling someone else's shoes would only take the company so far. If they wanted to build something truly powerful, they needed their own brand, their own products, and eventually, their own identity. That was when the company began moving toward something much bigger. Bowerman started experimenting with shoe designs. He wanted shoes that were lighter and gave runners better traction. One morning, while looking at a waffle iron in his kitchen, Bowerman reportedly got an idea. What if the pattern of a waffle could inspire a better running sole? The result was a new type of outsole design. It helped create the foundation for what became Nike's famous waffle trainer. This was more than a shoe. It represented something important about the company. Nike wasn't simply interested in selling athletic products. It wanted to solve problems for athletes. Then came the moment that would give the company its new identity. Blue Ribbon Sports needed a new name. The company eventually chose Nike. The name came from the ancient Greek goddess of victory. The symbolism was perfect: victory, speed, competition, performance. But Nike still needed a logo. The company approached graphic design student Carolyn Davidson. Knight asked her to create a symbol that suggested movement. She produced the now famous Swoosh. Knight reportedly wasn't completely convinced at first, but he approved it. And that simple curved shape would eventually become one of the most recognizable symbols in business. Nike was growing, but the athletic shoe industry was becoming increasingly competitive. The company needed something more than good products. It needed attention. And this is where Nike changed the rules. Instead of simply advertising shoes, Nike began building relationships with athletes. The company understood something powerful. People don't always buy products because of technical specifications. They buy what those products represent. If a great athlete wears your shoes, fans don't just see a shoe, they see performance, success, possibility. Nike began working with elite athletes, but then came a partnership that would change sports marketing forever. A young basketball player named Michael Jordan. In 1984, Jordan was entering the NBA. At the time, Nike wasn't the dominant basketball brand. The company wanted Jordan badly, and they made him an extraordinary offer. The result was the creation of Air Jordan. The partnership became a cultural phenomenon. The shoes weren't simply athletic equipment. They became fashion, status, identity, and eventually, a lifestyle. This was one of Nike's greatest breakthroughs. Nike realized that the product didn't have to be the entire story. The athlete could become part of the story. The shoe could become part of the athlete's identity. And the customer could imagine themselves becoming part of that story. Nike wasn't just selling footwear anymore. It was selling aspiration. Then came one of the most famous advertising campaigns in history. Just do it. 3 simple words. But they captured something much bigger than running or sports. They represented action, discipline, courage, the willingness to start, and the willingness to keep going. That message allowed Nike to connect with people who weren't professional athletes. You didn't need to be Michael Jordan. You didn't need to win championships. You didn't even need to be the fastest runner. You simply had to believe you could do more. That became Nike's emotional advantage, but building a global brand wasn't always easy. Nike faced intense competition. Other athletic companies were fighting for market share. Consumer tastes changed, fashion changed, technology changed, and the company faced criticism over labor practices and manufacturing conditions. Nike had to respond to growing public pressure and scrutiny over its global supply chain. The company gradually increased transparency and introduced changes to its labor and supplier practices. The lesson was important. When a company becomes global, its responsibilities become global too. Nike continued expanding: running, basketball, football, training, lifestyle products, digital fitness, and eventually, a huge ecosystem surrounding the athlete. Its stores became experiences, its advertising became storytelling, its athletes became ambassadors, its logo became a symbol of ambition, and its products became part of popular culture. But perhaps the most interesting part of Nike's business isn't the shoe, it's the brand. Think about what happens when you buy an ordinary pair of shoes. You buy the physical product. But when someone buys Nike, they may also be buying a feeling of being athletic, a feeling of being ambitious, a feeling of belonging. That emotional connection can be incredibly powerful. And that's one of the biggest lessons from Nike. A great brand doesn't only tell customers what a product does, it tells them who they can become. Nike's story also teaches another lesson: start with what you have. Phil Knight didn't begin with a huge factory. He didn't have billions of dollars. He started with an idea, a few imported shoes, and a willingness to sell them himself. The company grew because it kept reinvesting: better products, better athletes, better marketing, better distribution, and eventually, a stronger brand. Another lesson is innovation. Nike repeatedly experimented with new materials, designs, technologies, and manufacturing methods. Because in sports, standing still means falling behind. And the same is true in business. The third lesson is storytelling. Nike understood that people remember stories more than specifications. A shoe can weigh a certain amount, it can have a certain cushioning system, but a story about an athlete overcoming impossible odds, that's what people remember. The fourth lesson is partnerships. Nike's relationship with Michael Jordan didn't just create a successful shoe. It created an entirely new business opportunity. The right partnership can multiply the value of a brand. And the fifth lesson is consistency. For decades, Nike has repeatedly communicated a similar core idea. Believe in yourself. Work harder. Push further. Don't quit. That consistency helped turn a slogan into a global identity. Today, the Nike Swoosh is recognized around the world. But the remarkable thing isn't the logo. It's what the logo represents. A company that began by selling imported running shoes eventually became a symbol of athletic ambition. And the journey started with a young man asking a simple question. What if the future of athletic shoes could be different? That question became a company. That company became a brand. And that brand became a global cultural force. Phil Knight didn't know exactly where the journey would end. He simply kept moving forward. One shoe, one athlete, one customer, and one decision at a time. And maybe that's the real lesson behind Nike. You don't need to start with an empire. You need to start with an idea worth pursuing. Because sometimes, the world's biggest brands begin with something that looks almost insignificant. A pair of shoes, a car trunk, and a dream. This is Mr. Finspire, where business becomes a story.